All right. And we're here with the debate after show. I'm sitting here in Ogden, Utah with Gilliam Fancy Son after his epic defeat of the Dragon.
Yes.
Gil, so do you want to share your thoughts on your debate with Mr. Tom Jump? How do you think things went? How do you think your arguments could have been better? Do you think he even understood what you talked about? Give us your overall thoughts, and then we'll just kind of dive into some of the specifics here.
All right. So yeah, I actually enjoyed the debate to a certain extent. I mean, it was respectful, it was cordial, so I was glad about that. I don't think there's any point in us getting, shouting matches like Tom Jump had with Darth Dawkins or whatever. I feel like that was such a pointless debate. It was this screaming match at one point. So I really appreciated that there was, we allowed each other time to speak, and he gave me the time. And I would actually do it again, and I was pretty excited about it. And I had a good feeling after it finished that I accomplished, for the most part, what I wanted to do. As far as things that I may have been able to improve on, I suppose I could have talked a little slower. I knew that would happen. I could have maybe said a few less or whatever. So I got to work on some things. Overall, though, I was happy with it. I do think that Tom Jump just really misunderstood a lot of the arguments. So we had all this discussion about being, existence, and it turned into almost a semantic debate. Well, at least it appeared so. And I think a lot of people in the comments were saying it's word salad, and that's just their go-to thing to respond and saying this because they can't understand the concepts. They don't take the time to actually study the concepts. They just want to dismiss it out of hand. Well, because I can't understand it, that must be word salad. When there's actually a lot of meaning to it. In fact, it's common sense. Being, this cat has being, I have being, you have being. What's so hard to understand about that? What's so hard to understand about that existence? Something that each one of us has. You're an existing thing, I'm an existing thing. There's nothing complicated about that. There's nothing complicated to say that my hand has the potential to open up. I have the potential to stand up right now. I have the potential to, paint something. There's all kinds of potentials that are in me, and those are real. This is simply a fact of life. This is common sense. The thing is that they'd rather try to pretend it isn't by saying, oh, because these words are foreign and they seem archaic, therefore it's simply word salad. And the ironic thing is that it only becomes word salad if you have a certain philosophical worldview, as Tom Jump does. He wants to say everything that is conceptual is a reification. Automatically, that's just his presupposition. And of course, then if you have that presupposition, you're going to have an understanding in which you see the world as something completely distinct from our concepts, from our experiences. And I just simply think that that's unplausible. So one of the errors that I think that was, that I noticed more in terms of that discussion is that we seem to talk past each other, I think, and it's just he was talking about existence itself in the most broad sense. I was treating existence as if an abstract object, and that abstract object came to exist as a universal and some concrete object. That was not at all what I was saying, and I just think there was a misunderstanding there. At the same time, when it comes to that conceptual thing, I just think his epistemology is such that he can never know the world as it is in itself. And I wish I pointed this out more. Wish I made this more clear. He can never know the world in itself. He can only know the world of appearances. And so his appearances, when he calls the descriptions, you're just describing what a reality appears to be. You're not describing reality as it is in itself. You're only describing at best maybe ideas in your head, because you can't have access to the world as it is in itself, according to his view. And then so, of course, then he's going to say something like, well, you're reifying because there's an unassailable gap between mind and reality. Necessarily, then, under his belief system, you have to think that these concepts we construct, whether it's act, potency, being or non-being existence, they're necessarily something that's only mental. At least you can't go out of that mental realm. You can pretend you can, but he's not a realist about science. He's an anti-realist about science for the most part. He doesn't believe that those things are actually true.
It seems like he's an anti-realist about life, the real world.
Yeah, everything. He's an anti-realist about everything. So that's why he necessarily thinks that well, since we can't bridge that gap, any concept that you construct is necessarily going to be a reification. And that's just begging a question. It begs a question in favor of his view.
Would you define the word reification?
Yeah, so it was interesting. This is kind of like a little side note that's related to this. But when I was rewatching the debate, I noticed he put reification on the debate, and I did not see that. I knew he was typing something, but I did not see that on my end. I think that was a little bit of a snarky move on his end, just to kind of say, while I was talking, he wanted to basically say that everything I was saying was a reification. I just don't know. It just didn't seem very appropriate to do that.
That was not my read on it at all. I thought he didn't understand what reification was, so he looked up the word.
Oh, no.
That's what I thought was going on.
Oh, I see. No, he's definitely used that word before to refer to things, and in fact, in the past, he said that that Thomism reifies acting potency.
Okay.
So I was pretty sure I knew he knew what it was.
Okay.
It's just that it was a little bit of a douchey move, to be honest, to doing that while I'm speaking, and it would be preferable to him to say that after, but which he did. I just didn't think that was necessary. Anyways, but reification basically just means you're making something real that isn't. You're making something, so it's like, unicorns, you may reify unicorns by saying, okay, unicorns really exist out there, or numbers really exist out there.
Or Sasquatch?
Sasquatch, yes.
I almost said Wasatch because we're on the Wasatch Front here in Utah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So that's a major error. It's question begging his, and I wish I made this point more clearly. It's just that I didn't have time to. There was a lot of thoughts going into my head at the same time, and it was hard to collect it all together in one cohesive whole. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's his epistemology at work. So if you have that epistemology, necessarily you're going to think anything about metaphysics is going to be word salad. And there's no reason to think that that's true. There's no reason to think that there's an unassailable bridge between the mind and reality, or at least there's no reason to think that we should say that we don't have access to the actual world, At prima facie, at least, it seems that we do have access to the world. I'm seeing other minds right now. So Tom is aware that he exists. He's a thinking thing. He uses the cogito argument from Descartes. But
what is the cogito argument?
the cogito argument basically says that I think, therefore I am. He uses that to demonstrate, with certainty that there is something that he knows for sure that exists, which is namely himself. He knows because I'm thinking, it's impossible then for me to be deceived about me thinking. If some evil demon says you're not thinking, well, you're thinking in the process of thinking that you're not thinking. So it's unassailable in that sense. And so going back, it just seems for Tom, he acknowledges that his mind exists, and he's going to say that I exist too. But how does he know that? How does he know that he's actually perceiving a real object? Because reality, he has the reality and then appearances. He can say, "Oh, it appears to be another person." That's all he can say. But I can't say that I know there's another mind out there. And that's completely destroys the plausibility of his epistemology, I think. If he can't even know that other minds exist, if he can't know anything about the world itself, and he's an anti-realist about science and all these other things, it makes it radically implausible. What were your thoughts on that?
So I will actually just read the comment that I left on the video. And this was directed at Mr. Jump. I said to him, at Tom Jump, "This conversation was a complete waste of everyone's time. Sanders," that's you, "was using standard philosophical terms. You act like a radical skeptic about the real world and language as a way to not even grant the first premise. This is a debate trick, and we all know it for a fact. You do live your life as words have meanings that humans agree upon and refer to things in the real world. You need to either have more honesty or more humility. You need to focus on the actual argument and not just play word games. What does that word mean? For 2+ hours is a waste of our time and will not get your book published."
Dang, man. That's pretty savage. Wow. I mean, it's kind of ironic, too, because they're accusing me of playing word games. But at the end of the day, he was kind of playing the word games because he was understanding existence in all these other ways, these non-standard ways like you're pointing out. These are completely non-standard ways of understanding the terminology. And so he was disputing it under those grounds. I would not have had to dispute that with a common person. Everyone's like, okay, that makes sense. You tell a common person in the street, that something has existence, that thing exists, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense, of course, that just seems obvious. But his mind has been, I guess, I don't know, I don't want to say brainwashed, but it has definitely been muddled heavily by modern philosophy, especially the philosophy of Kant, philosophy of all these other thinkers that seem to think that there is a radical division between mind and world. And whereas Thomists like myself and even this common person refuse to see such a gap between mind and things. We believe it's just like, if we believe that there's a tight connection between the world and the mind itself. So like it's like a mirror, for example. When I see myself in the mirror, I'm not seeing a representation. I'm seeing myself by means of that mirror. Similar way, when we're seeing objects, we're seeing the objects being mirrored to our minds by means of our perceptive processes that we have in our sensation. So all these things kind of like, it differentiates our philosophies, I think, radically. And that's why he obviously thinks that my view is just word salad, because everything has to be word salad in metaphysics, since you can't describe reality in itself. It's undescribable. It can't be accessed. So that if you're trying to reify these concepts, it's unjustified, and it is mindset. And so I wish I was able to attack that and address that more clearly in there, And also another point that was pretty, that I wish I emphasized a little more, especially at the beginning, because he invoked quantum mechanics, and he invoked all these quantum fields, and that there's something that exists outside of space-time, that is actually physical. He kind of just asserts it. He just asserts, okay, the block time universe. And I'm like, what is that, though? What does it mean to be outside of space-time? And he didn't seem to have any kind of definition for it. I'm like, okay, you can say it's space-time. You can say it's immaterial, has all these features. It doesn't change in itself. It can change other things without itself being changed. But that's all I bought rock bottom. All you're saying is that this is pure actuality. So whatever you're describing, this mathematical model, turns out to just simply be God himself.
Yeah, so actually the second comment that I left right after my first one was, I said, Sanders says, change happens. Mr. Tjump says, change is fake because there are some theories that if proved right would prove that change is fake. Yeah, sound reasoning, dude.
I know, that really puzzled me. He said, you're reifying change. You're making change is just a description or an abstract object,
Yeah.
Like an abstract concept. I'm like, what are you talking about? It seems like he was speaking one thing and then he's contradicting himself in another to me. If it's a process, change is a process. I'm not saying the concept itself exists, like there's an abstract concept that just exists, like I try to explain to him a few times. It's rather just change is picking out something in the world. We're using that term as it's picking out a process of things that are changing from being to some other type of being. I don't know. I just didn't see why he didn't get that. So we had all this. It just degraded into like this debate over terminology. And I know that to some people that just seems pointless,
Oh no, it absolutely was pointless. There was no purpose. So I will maintain my assertion that he's just doing this as a debate tactic. He doesn't live his real life as a radical skeptic. He lives his real life as though words refer to reality, and he lives in the real world. The fact that he was trying to say that change doesn't exist, it's just an imaginary concept that we apply to things when they change, was nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I already told Gil this earlier, but I had to shut off the debate because I was just getting so annoyed with the what I saw as intellectual dishonesty, and I maintain that Mr. Tjump was just using a semantical trick to get out of actually debating the real argument. Mm-hmm. I mean, his critique of the Thomistic position by just reducing it to saying that it's playing word games, and then he continues to play word games for 2 hours was a waste of your time and a waste of the audience's time. And he's got a frustrating view of the world in general. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could just comment on his general view. So after looking at a lot of the conversations he's had and some of the work he's done in preparation for this dialogue that you had with him, would you just provide some comments in general on maybe some things that didn't necessarily come up in your dialogue with him, but things that you think Mr. Jump would benefit from hearing just as a whole. We kind of talked about some of that already, and we can bring up some of his objections to the Omni properties or that sort of thing if you'd want to go there. But what are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, so first before I forget, I do want to talk about that science part where you're talking, because he seemed to have a very extremely odd, bizarre view of science. That was extremely bizarre. He was saying that science can basically be you can develop science such that it's not, right now science is testable, science is quantifiable, but we could develop a science that's neither of those things, that has no it cannot be quantified, that has no empirical basis or anything. And I'm like, well, in that case, you're just talking about metaphysics, or you're talking about something different. Like, I don't see how that's science in the normal sense, and no one would even consider that science, at least not in the modern sense, unless you want to broaden the concept of science so generally that that metaphysics counts as science. And okay, fine, that's what Aquinas did. Science simply means in medieval philosophers that it's a body of knowledge. It's a way of discovering certain things. So fine, if that's what he wants to claim, but it doesn't do him any good. Now, to answer your question though more directly, I think, let me see, where would we start here? Because there's these omni properties that we did not address. I was hoping he would address that. I was hoping he would actually raise this flying spaghetti monster thing. I was really prepared for that.
I think he mentioned it once towards the beginning, but then didn't camp on that for very long.
Yeah, it was all in passing, and I was ready. I was hoping he would bring it up, but he didn't.
So maybe we'll just start there. If he had brought up his argument that the flying spaghetti monster was just as plausible, how would you have responded?
I'd basically say in response, like, what you're calling a spaghetti monster, it's really just God. You're just kind of like changing words up, just like I'm saying Schlob is different from a bachelor. Schlob is defined as simply an unmarried man, then it's the same thing as a bachelor. It's the same word. You're just using, it has the same meaning, and it's just different words. So that's, in fact, ironically, if you do the spaghetti monster, it's just word games at the end of the day. What you're talking about is really God. The second point I'd make in terms of the flying spaghetti monster is that no one takes it seriously. I'm making a metaphysical argument, so I'm talking about the most broad features of the world, the most general features about the world, which is being, non-being, actuality, potentiality, change. We're not talking about any particular feature, but when we're talking about spaghetti, it's highly particular. You're talking about very particular features of the world, and so if a spaghetti monster is just as plausible, if a spaghetti monster is just as plausible as as God, then you can also likewise say that any spaghetti metaphysics is just as valid as any other metaphysics. And that's simply absurd. No metaphysician, no philosopher would ever grant that. It's because it's so particular, so ad hoc to reason from this is a spaghetti monster, and he tries to strip it of all of its features. Okay, well, a spaghetti monster, it's not material. It's just immaterial. I'm like, well then, it loses all sense of its meaning if it's immaterial. Then it's no longer a thing that's for eating, its function. It's no longer something that has a particular shape and size, like strings. It's no longer made of pasta. You're talking about something completely different. You're just calling it spaghetti just to kind of save your theory, and it makes no sense at all. No sense at all. So that's what I would have said to that. To go again back to that Schlob example. I define Schlob again as an unmarried man. And so if we take that and compare it to Schlob to then bachelor, we know that they have the same meaning, so therefore they're the same concept. They're the same things. You're just calling different words. It means nothing. And I just think that if anyone is playing a game of semantics or word salad, it's going to be Tom. His view necessarily makes him play that game. So I think that's all I have to say about the flying spaghetti monster. I was definitely hoping he would engage more on his naturalistic pantheism as well. We kind of got lost into the whole quantum stuff that he was proposing. The thing is, going back to that point, he likes to appeal to quantum a lot, but he just doesn't have any. He says he agrees that physics has no idea what it is, ontologically speaking. It's a mathematical model, but what is it? What is it? What you're saying? It has no. It doesn't make any sense. I think the next thing I wanted to talk about too is that whole napkin analogy that he gives when he was debating Trent. I thought that was interesting to some extent, but I think it's fundamentally wrong. And now if he was going to raise it in that debate, what I was going to say was, well, yes, you can't reason from there like a being holding 10 billion napkins, so therefore that being must be all powerful, right? And the reason why you can't do that is that the finitude of a being does not justify its an infinite property. That's what he calls omni properties. Being all powerful is an example of an omni property or omnipotence. He says it's impossible. And in fact, he claims in his Trent debate that in order to claim that this being knows everything, Tom himself has to know everything about this being to verify that this being knows everything. And I simply think that's an absurd claim. You don't have to know everything in order to say that there has to be a being that's omnipotent or all-powerful. And the reason why I say that is because take any finite amount, like 1, 2, or 3, take any finite, discrete finite amount, and you want to ask the question, well, how do we know infinity is possible? How do we know we have infinite sense? How do we even know it's coherent in the first place? And we establish coherence in terms of taking the qualities of a finite quantity, and we take that finite quantity, and then we kind of reason, what is the quality of a finite object, a finite number? Well, it has this particular quality. It has this 1, number 2, number 3, and we can add this on infinitum. There's no limiting principle to discrete finite units. It's not such that, okay, we can add up to like 10,000, but we can't add up any more because there's something in the nature of numbers that prevents us from adding up to a higher number. There's nothing in the nature of numbers that prevents us from adding more and more ad infinitum. So if we can then establish from that, taking the qualities of something finite, we can then justify, yeah, of course it's coherent. It necessarily, because there's no limiting principle in those quantities that would make it such that it's only of a particular quantity. Those quantities can then extend onto infinity. So in a similar sense, when we're talking about God's existence, when we're talking about these things, we're talking about being, and being has certain qualities, such as being contingent or being necessary. So we establish that God's necessary properties as omni properties in terms of its qualities, not in terms of these finite, discrete things by themselves. We're taking the qualities of these finite things, these finite beings, to then infer or deduce that there has to be an infinite being. And that's a little complicated. I'm probably going a little too philosophical here, but that would be my response in terms of his napkin analogy and in terms of his omni properties. He simply does not have his epistemology and metaphysics properly geared to understand what it is that us deists are doing. So then, let me see what else I can say. I already talked about his epistemology and how he has his mind and world gap. So I think we pretty much settled that. He has to justify his claim. He simply can't just assert it. And then, is there anything else you think I should talk about? I'm just thinking.
Well, if it's all right with you, I'd like to read you some of the notes that I wrote to you beforehand. We kind of reviewed some of his material together in order to get ready. And so, real quick, would you just remind the audience what Mr. Tjump says about how he needs to be omniscient?
Oh, how he needs to... Yeah, so basically the argument is in order for us to know that this being is omniscient, Tom Tjump has to be able to evaluate all that this being knows in order to say, okay, then this being therefore knows everything. So Tom has to be omniscient himself to know what all that this being knows. So he'd have to be God. And that's impossible criteria then. So he's making it impossible to justify God's existence because he says, unless I'm God, then only unless I'm God can God's existence be proven, at least under that kind of argument that he's making.
Right, so what he says is there's no way to know that a being is omniscient or omnipotent, or as opposed to just very knowing and very powerful. And I kind of came up with this somewhat of a little bit of a cheeky kind of a response to that. I said, an all-good being cannot lie. If God exists, he is all good. God cannot lie. God says he is all-knowing and all-powerful. Therefore, God is all-knowing and all-powerful.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're basically arguing from the quality of morality, from perfection, to saying, okay, since morality is qualitatively perfect, it's then we can argue then from the morality itself that there must be a perfect being. That seems completely reasonable. You can actually establish an omni property from that. if I'm understanding your argument correctly there. So
Right. So I am a person who happens to favor the argument from the ontology of morality. And so I usually go the route of establishing omnibenevolence before anything else. And I just happen to realize that the omnibenevolence could be used to justify the rest of the so-called omnis.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah, that is true. I think that's a pretty clever argument. I wonder what he would say in response.
Well, hopefully he sees this.
I'm hoping that as well. Maybe he'll kind of make a video reply to us. That would be interesting. So yeah, there's another point that I wanted to make too, in terms of he really emphasizes consensus a lot in philosophy. Consensus in philosophy, like, oh, the consensus in philosophy is that, Thomism is this and consensus is this, and I think he just kind of makes this up as he goes. Almost sometimes it's just like, where do you get that consensus? You get the consensus that Thomism is garbage, or it's gibberish, or it's just word games. No one really says that. It's not a consensus. Just because people reject a view does not make it a consensus. And like I told him, there's Stephen Munford, there is Nancy Cartwright, there's John Haldane, there's Kit Fine, very prominent analytic philosophers, and they obviously hold this Thomism in high regard. They don't treat it like a joke. They don't treat it like a word game. So I think that his arguments simply don't really stand. And in fact, if we read Leiter Report, they took a poll on what the top philosophers of all time are, the most important philosophers of the Western history. And Aquinas was among number 9. Aristotle was number 1. And that says a lot. Like, Western philosophers take Aristotle very seriously. Even if they reject his views ultimately, they still take it very seriously. They don't dismiss it like just trash. It's meaningless garbage. And that's what I believe Tom was doing. And it just doesn't make any sense. And so he likes to use consensus, but it doesn't work out the way he wants it to be. He just asserts consensus without actually any proof. He adds his own interpretation to it. So, what did you want to add to that?
I just wanted to say that, by the way, I thought if there was a kind of a thug life moment in there, it was when you started pressing him for specifics about where he's getting his philosophical consensus, and then you named about 8 or 10 really good Thomistic philosophers who were well respected, and he's just like,
Yeah, I should have questioned him more on that stuff. Or another thing I got him too, I think, on was when he was describing, I told him, asking, what does it mean to be physical? And he described it as being quantifiable. Then later on, he revises that. He changes that. I mean, that's fine. I guess sometimes we just need to revise something because we didn't realize it beforehand what we were doing, but it just didn't seem to work very well for him, I think. If he just defines anything as physical, then it just becomes a meaningless term. You're just saying everything's physical, even if things that aren't actually have any matter and form. So I really think that overall there was just a lot of misunderstanding, just like what he appealed to existence is not a predicate. And Kant, but just because you say existence is not a predicate, you can appeal to Kant all you want. He's false. It's wrong. It's dead wrong. We both know that when you say this, this human has existence, whereas Superman does not have existence, it's a significant difference. It's a property. You're describing something actual about the way that thing is. And we got a little lost, though, a little bit, I suppose, when we're talking about descriptions, because he thinks that descriptions is not being properties at all. But how can you describe something without describing its properties? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. But I think that about sums it up for me and how I wanted to respond to it. I wish I just emphasized a little more, again, when he's talking about these non-physical things, this naturalistic explanation of the world. I was like, well, what you're saying is non-physical is actually just God. You're not actually describing something that's distinct from that concept. And I wish I really harped onto that. But overall, I think the debate went pretty well. People in the comments don't think so much, but they're kind of brain dead, to be honest. I don't even care. So.
Okay, so actually something I thought might be kind of fun to do is maybe to read some of the comments.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
And just see how you might respond to them, or how they might be misunderstanding what was said. So let's see. Let's just try to pick one out here. Okay, here's one that I thought was interesting. If something could change itself, it would happen all the time. And they're quoting you when they say that. If something could change itself, it would happen all the time. And then they go on to say that doesn't seem to follow. It's not even that hard to think of how laws within our universe might limit the ability of things to change themselves, but for that limitation to cease outside. Quantum events occur with seemingly no external cause, but that doesn't mean things pop in and out of existence at the macro level. At the end, it seems like an argument from ignorance.
Okay, so there's a lot of problems with that. First off, the problem is what in the world is a law of nature? They always appeal to that. But what is a law of nature if you think about it? So, there's different competing explanations of laws of nature, and so typically, but the human interpretation is what's taken to be the definitive of what it is to be a law of nature, and that simply describes. It says that if if A follows after B on a regular basis, there's a tendency for A to follow after B, then there's a law. There's a law there that obtains. But you're not describing anything. You're not saying what that law of nature is. You're simply saying you're describing a process and events occurring. You're saying that this regularly follows after this event. And then you're determining, gravity. You throw something, you throw an apple in the air, and it typically falls. That tends to be its natural outcome, its effect. So then we have this law called gravity. But it isn't as if there is some abstract law out there, kind of making this happen. What is it that it is making this happen? And it's going to ultimately be the most plausible explanation of what is making that happen is going to be the Aristotelian analysis, which is that the thing itself is causing it. The thing's powers, causal powers, is influencing the causal order such that you see these patterns of causality. These patterns of causality that laws of nature pick out are actually just aspects of features of the things themselves. And so if that's the case, then you can't have laws. Laws don't restrict anything. There isn't some magical law that surpasses, or that hovers over every physical object. It's rather that the physical object exerts these things in its own nature. So you're not explaining anything. He's not explaining anything. He's just simply describing the way things operate, but he's not describing how that is true. So that's the first problem. And then the second problem, what was the other part he said? He said something about, for basically the idea is that if there is nothing preventing potentialities from actualizing itself, then nothing would. So then we should see it happen on a regular basis, if actuality is always there. And then his other comment here, let's see. What happened to that comment there? Okay, it would happen all the time. All right, so. And then it's not hard to fire my limited ability for changing changes. Okay, so the quantum events. This is the thing that's always appealed to all the time. Occur seemingly no external cause. That's not proof. Just because something appears to be the case is not the case. That does not prove that is how it in fact what's happening. In fact, there's actual causal antecedents prior to those quantum events. So we have the quantum vacuum. You have certain vectors, state vectors that are prior that explain why that particular event happens. They don't determine that event. It's not in a deterministic sense, but they're causal antecedents, and so they provide some kind of explanatory power for why that event occurred. Even if you think that it has to be deterministic, we have Bohm's interpretation, his hidden variable interpretation of quantum mechanics, which says that there could be a hidden variable, something that makes it deterministic, and it seems completely plausible and completely possible. You can't rule that out because the quantum data itself is simply indeterminate in respect to what theory is correct. It's such an abstract thing in quantum mechanics that you simply can't appeal to quantum mechanics to prove your point. It's indeterminate, and so it just goes, it's kind of crazy when they try to use this quantum mechanics as if it proves their theory when it doesn't. There's just so much unknown things about quantum mechanics there. So that would be my response to him. Is there any other comments?
Okay, let's see. Here's another one. Gil, please cite anything material that was caused to exist by a mind only.
Caused to exist by a mind only. I don't see the point of this question, first off. Cite anything material. Well, obviously the universe, I just asserted that, I'm like, well, if the universe is made of active potency, it's being actualized, then yeah, it's a universe, everything. He what is he trying to say here? It doesn't make any sense as a question. That was caused to exist by a mind only. You can, I know of an example too, though, the unicorn. I caused that to exist in my mind. I brought it up, at least not into exist. I didn't cause it to exist in the external world, but there's a certain sense in which I did cause it to exist. namely my mind. You know, I mean, he might not say that that's the type of existence he's talking about, but minds can definitely create things. There's no reason to think it can't. So what other comments do we have here? Okay, Gil is not proving anything except word salad. He's not proving that things change all the time. Are there things that do not change? Okay, first off, again, when everyone says it's word salad, they haven't demonstrated anything. They're just kind of using that as a dismissive term, kind of like, oh, you're stupid. That's it. You know, it doesn't prove anything. He has to explain, what is it about what I said it is a word salad? Does he have no idea what it means to be a being? Does he not understand the concept of what it actually, of actuality, of potentiality? Like, what is it that he doesn't get? But also another thing, too, when he says he has not proven that things change all the time. I never said change happens all the time. I said this explicitly in the apprentice, whenever something is changing, it is being changed by something else. I'm not saying everything is changing. I said whenever something is changing. So it just doesn't, the question doesn't make sense. And then he says, are there things that do not change? Well, yes, that's God. I don't know what else to say.
Or even the color blue.
Yeah, or universals, or abstract
the
objects.
Number 7.
Yeah, exactly. What's the problem here? I never said everything changes, so this is a completely lousy objection.
Here's a good one. This poor guy wasted his education. He should have focused on something more useful, like tarot card reading.
Okay. I feel like this guy just wasted his life by making this comment and wasted my time just for reading it. So I didn't waste anything. It was unfortunate to him that he just simply he doesn't have understanding of these concepts. So sucks for him. Okay, let's see what other comments we got here. Do you want to read that?
Go for
it. Okay. This is your comment.
Go for it.
Okay. Go ahead.
No.
Okay. I think that pretty much sums it up. No one's really giving any substantive replies at all to my original formulation. You notice that, right? It's all complete hand dismissals, hand wavels. Like, okay, no one's addressing anything. What premise are you attacking? What do you disagree with? They're not really being explicit. They're not philosophers, these people. They're just internet skateboard atheists who think they know it all. And anyone who disagrees with them is obviously just playing word games. When in reality, they're the ones who don't know what they're talking about. So I guess that about sums it up then. I don't know of any other comments we need to address at the moment.
Yeah, we can always leave it open to do a follow-up episode or further readings on the matter, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of writing on the website.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Make sure to plug that website, by the way.
Yes, I should have mentioned that. I forgot about introducing walkingchristian.com. I did not say that at the beginning. See, that just kind of proves to I was a little nervous at the beginning, so I wasn't thinking fully and clearly as much as I wanted to. Then I started getting to my groove, after that. But yeah, so as far as recommended reading, I definitely recommend just reading Aquinas, Edward Feser, if you really want to actually understand the ideas rather than simply dismiss them. You want to read his work.
Here's one comment that we kind of skipped over. I wanted to ask you about it. Let me see.
Okay.
It says, at Tom Jump, please get Edward Feser. Just out of curiosity, as someone who knows the man, do you think Professor Feser would be up for this kind of argument?
Usually not. Feser is so busy all the time, he doesn't have the time to debate on an online internet atheist. It's super unlikely, unfortunately. And if he did, he would get pretty. Edward Feser is a little more hot-headed than I am, but that would be interesting. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing it, but because I think Edward Feser really presents his views pretty compellingly. But for the most part, I think Edward Feser had a great discussion of Graham Opie, recently on Capturing Christianity, which I thought was great, So I don't think there needs to be anything. I think Edward Feser just needs to address the best if there is out there. I mean, well, I don't want to say that they should have this arrogance that, these low people who have no PhD, they're beneath me. I don't want to advocate that kind of mentality either. I mean, it's just that you have to use your time wisely at the same time. And so since Feser is a busy guy, he has all these kids, he's teaching, he has all these speaking engagements, I just don't think that he's going to do it.
And then one last question. If you had to give Mr. Jump's view a name, what would you call it? And Jumpism is off the table.
Jumpism is off the table? Oh, man. I would call it Trumpianism in some sense. You know, I just kind of avoid it because he thinks he's trumping all these theists. He thinks he has the ultimate apologetic. All he has to do is like, well, whatever argument you theists can use against us, I can use this to demonstrate naturalistic pantheism. He thinks he has this really clever kind of response to theistic arguments that would just kind of like confound them and make them baffled. But that didn't happen. That's not true. You know, I think that, as I said and I proved, you know, this being has all these properties and therefore must be God and naturally is God. And he didn't really quite address that. He just kind of invoked naturalistic pantheism in passing, but didn't really address the arguments I had for why this purely actual being has to be, you know, omnipotent, has to have all those omni properties. So that's what I would say, Trumpianism. He just thinks, you know, he can defeat any argument, but when he really doesn't seem to know much of anything as far as like his epistemology is concerned. By his own admission, he doesn't know anything.
Right. And I think I would call it walking the plankism.
Walking the plankism?
In other words,
Okay.
so the second that he thinks it'll be useful to abandon ship, to abandon everything we know about the real world as his debate trick, he think the second it's convenient, he will let that boat run into the iceberg and walk the plank and take his risks out in the ocean.
That's that's kind of true, actually, huh? That's a good analogy. I like that. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, as we say all this, you know, I do like the guy to some extent. I mean, I think I do think he's a little. Yeah, I think he is a little like sometimes smug, especially in his debates. I think there's pride there. But I did enjoy the conversation. We had a cordial conversation. I want nothing for the best, but the best for this guy. You know, that's why I wanted to have that cordial conversation. And I strongly disagree with him, so that's why I'm saying these things in this podcast. But at the same time, I'm doing it so that hopefully we can invite him to another future debate. You know, him and I, or you and him, because I know the historical arguments are more your area for Christ than it is my area. And so we can continue the dialogue, you know, and may hope for something best to come out of that. Hopefully that he can see the light, you know. We don't have any ill will toward him. We don't want to see him fail. We don't want to see him suffer. And we just want to be able to understand him better.
And that is true. I may have spoken in a kind of blunt and candid way throughout, but, you know, Jesus said to pray for your enemies, and I have been praying for Mr. Jump, and we do wish the best for him. We want him to give up some of his prideful arrogance, cease his rebellion, and to find the truth.
Yeah, so we hope you hear this, Tom, and we hope you are able to have continued dialogue with us, and that one day you come to see the truth. Thank you for that discussion.
WalkingChristian.com.
Visit it now.